Okay, welcome to the CHAOSS OSPO working group meeting for September 18th. As always, this is a CHAOSS meeting, so we're subject to the CHAOSS Code of Conduct, so please be kind to each other. The question of the day is, what's something you wish you knew more about? Languages appears to be a popular choice. Cooking, that's also good. You can always learn more about cooking. There's always something new to explore there for sure. Okay, so we have a couple of things on the agenda. So before I turn it over to Natalia for the demos, let's just run through the agenda real quick. So I wanted to mention that Gary and I have been taking his blog posts and his 5 metrics models and turning them into a practitioner guide. So we finally have that at a point where it's ready for people to review. So I would encourage you, especially those of you who run or work within OSPOs, to have a look at that guide and provide us with some feedback. So we'd really appreciate any comments on that. And it's really exciting to see all of Gary's work make it into a practitioner guide. So I'm pretty excited about that. We'll also, assuming we have time after the demos, wanted to quickly talk about the tooling that people are using within their OSPOs, just to get a feeling for maybe the types of agenda items we might want to have in the future. I would also encourage you to have a look at this future agenda items section, and if there's anything you'd like to see us cover in a future talk, feel free to drop it into the agenda here, and we'll take a look at it. And then we'll do the reminders at the end. Okay, any questions about the agenda before I turn it over to Natalia? All right, awesome. I am going to stop sharing because it's a demo, so I assume you'd like to. You're on mute if you're talking.
Okay,
Okay, cool.
I will be sharing screen. I'm going to share desktop.
Awesome.
Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Natalia. I'm a software engineer as part of the open source program office at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And today I'll be demoing some of our tools that we use in our OSPO. Since last week I showed off one of our landing pages for these tools and we got some requests to actually demo the tools. So that's what I'll be doing today. For people that were not here in our last OSPO working group meeting, last week I showed off our Repo Scaffolder landing page. Repo Scaffolder is a tool that our OSPO has been working on for about a couple of years, and it assists project teams with creating new repositories that align with our organization's repository hygiene standards and best practices in open source development. And so for some background, there are 3 major components to these tools. First, we have our maturity model framework, and this helps project teams identify what level of maturity their open source repository is based on their composition and goals. Oh, I see Remy has a hand up. Remy is our open source lead as part of our OSPO.
Just wanted to say hit Command plus a couple times to make the text
Oh,
a little bigger
true.
for the
Okay.
recording. Please and thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks, Remy. Okay, cool. Yeah, so our maturity model framework helps us identify where a open source project is at their journey, and we kind of determined 5 maturity tiers to go along with that. We have private repository, which is when a project is usually private, usually has a single developer, is kind of for experimental purposes. Then we have one-time release, where a project is released publicly, but there's no plan to do kind of future activity or maintenance on top of the repository. So it kind of acts as like informational and historical. Next, we have close collaboration, where we have a project that is open source, but a small team is working on it regularly. And this is usually a team within an operational division or an a repository that follows inner source. Then 3 is working in public, which is like our tier 2 tier. However, the project is open to external contribution, and it's usually CMS led or agency led. And finally, tier 4 is community governance, where the project is kind of stewarded by an external community that welcomes external input, and it's just overall our most mature tier in our framework with open governance. Okay, cool. And then based on the tier that your project lands on, we have repository templates that you can create for each of the tiers. And so in my demo today, I'll be showing you how we go about creating those. And finally, we have our outbound checklist where a project team, if they want to release their repository as open source, they go through this checklist and follow each step so that we can do a comprehensive review of the repository and from there release the code publicly. Okay, cool. So that's our 3 components of our repo scaffolder tool. And today I'll be showing off how exactly we go about creating an open source repository using repo scaffolder. Okay, cool. So here I have kind of our checklist where it shows you how we can publish a repository. So I'll be following that on the left side. And then on the right side, I'll be showing you how exactly we use the tool to make this happen. Okay, cool. So first, we have to identify our project's maturity model tier, and we can either do this through our Python script or through our maturity model tier quiz, which is actually in this landing page over here. So we ask 5 questions based on your repository, and then from there, it will give us what tier our repository lands on. So for instance, let's say we are creating a web dashboard and we have a team dedicated to working on this. We plan on making releases over time, and we want to accept external contributions from the community. So based on that use case, here is how I would answer this quiz. So does your project have more than one contributor? Yes, we're working in a team. Do you plan on shipping more than one release? Yes, we'll be continuously developing on this. Do you plan on having other individuals or teams outside the agency work with you? Yes, we'll be taking external contributions. And do you plan on having other individuals outside the agency maintain the project with you? Yes, we want to have a community behind this. Okay, and then we're going to click submit. And it looks like that this web dashboard project will be a tier 3 working in public project. And if you click on this button over here, you can learn more about what exactly is a tier 3 project. So it's collaborative, usually led by an agency team, accepts limited contributions from the community. Okay, cool. And then so the next step after determining our tier, or actually, let me show you another way that we can determine the tier, is that we have a Python script that assists you with that. So we're going to go to our repo scaffolder repository landing page. And then how you would go about this is you can clone the repository. I already cloned the repository, so I'm going to just go into the repository, scaffolder. Okay, cool. And then let me zoom in to this. Yeah, okay, cool. And then when I scroll down over here, need help picking a maturity model tier, this is the command you would use to run this Python script. Okay, cool. All right, cool. Then we have little intro text over here. Welcome to the CLI. We'll help you with creating a repository. It goes through each of the tiers in our maturity model framework. And then after that, it asks those same list of questions. So do you have more than one contributor? Yes. Do you plan on shipping more than one release? Yes. Plan on having teams outside the agency work with you? Yes. Teams outside the agency maintain the project with you? Yes. And develop the roadmap with you? No. Cool. And then it says our project is classified as tier 3. You can visit this link for more information. And finally, you can create your tier 3 repository using this cookie cutter command. Okay, I'm going to stop here. So that was step 1 of how we go about creating repositories in our organization. Does anyone have any questions with determining your maturity model tier? Okay, awesome. I'm going to move on to the second step, which is actually creating and setting up your repository. So there's 2 ways of going about this. One, I need to update the docs, but we recently set up repository templates in our organization where you can simply make a copy of, and then you'll be able to have all the files you need for a tier 3 project and hit the ground running from there. And the way that you would do this is we have our repository template in our DSAC MS org, and then you'd click use this template, create a new repository, and then it asks for information. I'm going to create this on my own web dashboard. Choose visibility. Let's make it public. Yep, there you go. Okay, and then you can create the repository. There you go. And that is how you can use repository templates on GitHub to create a repo. And then I can just simply hit the ground running. Okay. And then one of the things I also wanted to do is go over what exactly are the files in a tier 3 repository and the type of content that you would need to fill in. Okay, cool. And then, okay, so first we have our README. And then also I'm going to show alongside one of our documents. Let's see, learn more. Okay, cool. So based on, as I said before, based on each tier that you have, based on each of the tiers offered, there are certain files that are required for each of the tiers. So for tier 3, here are the files that are required and will be in our repository. As you can see over here, they should match. And then based on each of the files, there's certain content that needs to be included in the files based on each of the tiers. So here it is for tier 3. So for instance, in our README, for tier 3, a project description is required, a project vision, project mission, agency mission, team mission is recommended. Yes. And then so you can just follow along this table and it will tell you what information is mandatory, recommended, or optional to include in your repository. And then so now I'll be going through each of the files that are in a tier 3 project. So we have our README. And then it's written in Markdown, and then we have some to-do comments over here that assist you with filling in this information. Yep. So we have things about the project, the team, repository structure, development, branching model, community. And then if you notice, we have these variables over here, which tell you what exactly you need to fill in, the type of information you need to fill in. And this I will actually go more in depth later. And then we have our security policy, which is required for all of our projects, our license, Of course, we usually default to Creative Commons 1.0 Universal. We have a contributing.md where we put information on how external users can contribute to our repositories. And here we also have to-do comments that assist you with filling in this type of information. We have a code of conduct. And finally, we have our community.md file, which kind of which tells the user who is involved in the project, what are their roles and responsibilities as maintainers, approvers, and reviewers. And here we acknowledge the contributors, have our community guidelines, and finally, I believe we have an alumni section too. Yes. Okay, cool. Okay, so that is all about what is in a tier 3 project. Does anyone have any questions about file content?
Quick question, Natalia. Does
Yes.
the security.md change based on the tier, or is that one of the ones where it's always going to be the same no matter what tier you're at, because security is just super important no matter where you're at?
Yeah, that would be the latter. This is the same for all projects across all tiers.
Okay, cool.
Okay, thank
Thank you.
Yes, of course. Okay, cool. So that's file content in our tier 3 project. Next, I'll show you another way you can create a repository. Okay, so I'm going to close this. And then, cool. Okay. And then, okay, cool. So we have our tier determiner Python script. And one of the things that it told us to do next is to create your tier 3 repository, run the command below. And then they gave us this cookie cutter command. So the tool that we use to create and build on top of our repository templates is a Python tool called Cookie Cutter. And it assists you with creating repository templates and being able to fill in those templates with information that you'd like to put into it. And then so I'm going to copy and paste this command over here. And this is what we use to actually create our repository. And then right now I'm in the repo scaffolder directory. So I'm going to go to my desktop so that I can create the repository from there. Okay, cool. So I copy and paste this in. Cool. Looks like I'm going to re-download the cookie cutter config file that I have just to make sure that I'm up to date. Okay, cool. And now we are in the CLI to create the tier 3 repository. And then it asks us a series of questions about our project. So I'm going to put this as web dashboard, project slug, web dashboard. And then these values over here in parentheses are kind of default values that you can go with. Okay, project org, DSAC MS, that's our GitHub org, so yes. Project repository name, web dashboard, pretty happy with that. Project description, this is a web dashboard for the CMS OSPO. And then it asks us, so one of the cool things about Cookie Cutter is that you can fill in information for certain files, and that's kind of what we decided to do in our Cookie Cutter config. So would you like to add a code owners.md file? So I'm going to go with that. Select project visibility. Let's do private for now. Would you like to create a repo on GitHub? Let's do false for now. I just want to create it locally. Would you like to receive updates? True. And then would you like to add project team members to community.md? I'm going to do yes. And would you like to add maintainers, approvers, and reviewers to community.md? So I'm going to do yes. And after that, it's going to ask us for information for that. So project member role, engineer, Natalia. DSAC, that's my org. Yes. Okay. And project member role, I'm going to add Dawn, so OSPO group. CHAOSS, OSPO working group facilitator. Dawn Foster, CHAOSS. Okay, and it'll just be the two of us. And then and then it asks us to create a list of maintainers, approved reviewers. So I'm just gonna go with that. So it's on Yoga. Okay, cool. I hit enter, and then it's actually creating the repository, adding all the files we have in our template, and then our new repository has successfully been created. So I'm going to open VS Code and open our new project. Okay, cool. Cool. And this is our new project that we created, the web dashboard. And notice how it filled in information such as like the repository name, our description, helped us create a table for project members, also helped us create a list of maintainers, approvers, and reviewers. So this is one of the cool things about Cookie Cutter is that not only can you create a repository using a repository template, but it helps eliminate some of the manual labor you have to do with filling in information about your repositories. Yep. And then from there, you can fill in the rest of the information in this table over here that you need for based on your tier. And then after that, you can hit the ground running, add new files to the project, and just develop your project from there. Okay, cool. So that's how Cookie Cutter works. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, we did this one.
I am curious, do you have a sense for how many people click the button on GitHub versus how many people use the command line interface tools?
So we've had this CLI tool for I think around 2 years now, and it's kind of been the main way that we went about creating repositories. We actually created these GitHub templates recently based on user research sessions that we did, I think like 2 months ago. So the GitHub repositories are actually like a super recent addition to one of the ways that we create repositories. And based on my hunch, I feel like it might serve as the main way that people might go about doing so at our organization. Okay, cool. But yeah, since that was a very new a very new development, this is we have still yet to update the docs on that being a primary way of creating a repository. So this would fall under here. Okay, cool. And then let's see. Okay, cool. So that's how you go about using Cookie Cutter. And then okay, and then I'm just gonna wrap up this checklist over here of how a repository becomes published. So you have all the files you need, and then you can start developing your project from there. So say I have like decides this is a web dashboard, so I'm gonna add some HTML files, CSS files, JavaScript files too. Okay, cool. And say that after a couple of months, your project is finally ready to be released as open source. So as I mentioned, we have a outbound checklist that goes through this review process. So I'm going to show you how that looks like. Tier 3, checklist. Okay, cool. Okay, so this is how how we would go about doing an outbound review. I also have some team members from the CMS OSPO in the chat that has gone through this process before too, so feel free to chime in. But the first step that we go about when going about an outbound review is first we assess the benefits and risks. I'm go over here. So we list the benefits of open sourcing the project here, as well as the risks. And then we have a couple questions that we would ask the project team, such as, does the code contain any PII, PHI? Does it interface with our organization's internal systems? Does it contain any keys to access or authenticate with those systems? And under this results column, they would write down their response over here. So after doing so, we then undergo a code review, a code analysis, where we use these open source tools below to look for any security vulnerabilities, and then we fix accordingly. Then we review the licensing, the commit history for any sensitive URLs or credential files. And we also offer open source tools that they can use to do that. And then finally, we review the repository hygiene, aka make sure that all the files that they need for that tier is in their repository. And we do this using a tool called RepoLinter. I think I can run this. Here, let me show you how we run this actually. Okay, so RepoLinter is another tool that we use in the OSPO that helps us lint the repositories based on a set of rules, and it identifies what is missing from the repository and what is already in the repository. So I believe if we do this, it will help us with this. Okay, cool. Yeah, so in RepoLinter, repolinter.json, here we have a series of rules, and we indicate the level of the rule, whether it's an error, so the rule is required to comply by, or it is a warning. And then from there, we run the config file, and it lists out what files exist in the repository and what complies with it. Cool. It also lists out whether certain sections in some of the files are required and what is missing in those sections as well. Yep. And so this is helpful because this allows us to check for repository hygiene, to make sure that the repository complies with our repository hygiene standards, so that when we ship it to the public, all repositories across all our organizations will have information needed and will be consistent across the organization too. So that's one of the other tools we use, RepoLinter. Cool. And then so we have a section where the user just runs that to make sure. And then we also have a section where we review the actual content that you fill in those files. And that's a checklist over here. Okay, cool. And then next we have, along with repository hygiene, we have a metadata. We also review project metadata. And this, I think I will do a part 2 on how exactly we go about adding metadata to our repository. I still need to make sure it's up to date with our latest changes, so I will save this for another CHAOSS working group meeting. But here we have a file called code.json, which is required in our repository, and we use cookie cutter to fill in information that we need to have in our code.json file, since code.json is a file that contains project metadata for our repository. Cool. And then after that, we go through some GitHub specific things, like review the repository details on the GitHub homepage. And finally, once we go through everything, we get sign off from all the stakeholders needed. Okay, cool. And then from there, you can flip the switch, make the repository public, and then afterwards we have some recommended actions on what you can do to set up your repository now that it's public. So we suggest dependabot alerts, branch protections, and assist with have some guidance on a communications rollout. Okay, And that takes us to the end of our how a repository becomes public checklist. Okay, cool. Does anyone have any questions? But I hope this is helpful. That's kind of the suite of tools that we have to help project teams hit the ground running with creating repositories in our organization. So,
Yeah, thank you so much. This is super interesting. And it's really interesting to see the difference between, click the button on GitHub versus the command line cookie cutter approach. And it's really slick. I really like it. Um, I had a question. I just have to remember what the question was. Oh, I'm curious, which parts of this does your team do? Like, are you the ones that flip the switch? Like, because some of it is, self-service checklists. Some of it, might be things that your team does. So I'm curious where you draw that line.
let's see. I think in the past it kind of depends on the team. Some teams they don't have some teams have technical folks, so because of that, it's a lot less hand-holding and more self-service. And then if they have any questions, they can just message us. Other teams, they kind of have non-technical folks that aren't familiar with GitHub or don't or are kind of unsure with how exactly to install these tools. So that's where we kind of do some hand holding, and we would meet with the team and we would ask for certain information and we would help them create the repository for them. So that's what I've encountered in the past. And right now, Dina, one of our team members, and I, we're going through some user research sessions to kind of help assess how we can help those non-technical folks better, and also assess for the technical folks that are kind of doing self-service, is there any gaps that are kind of present that they have that are kind of unclear as they go through this process. Yeah, so still making some improvements on top of the current process we have.
Have you ever had any cases where somebody has sort of flipped the switch to publish it before they've gone through the proper checklist? Like maybe not
I
maliciously, but sort of accidentally or
I don't think so, Remy, right?
Yeah, if it's not us that's managing the repository, usually we have contractors that manage it depending on what part of the agency you are. And so usually file some kind of support ticket to actually flip the switch at the end. And so we have had things happen after the switch has been flipped, like just recently, Dina worked to outbound a bunch of repos for the Department of Health and Human Services, which is our parent agency. We've been working with their chief data officer, Kristen Honey, and the CIO, Kevin Ball, the deputy there. And they just released a bunch of Lyme disease research repos that were developed. And so after we pushed them, they said, oh, actually, these were the working titles of the repositories. And now the new title is actually this. So I just went through and manually fix stuff because we ran cookie cutter. We're like, the project name is the name of the repo, right? And then, so we had to go back through and manually push commits just hours ago to be like, okay, fix this URL, fix this title. And so I think maybe in the future there might be a good way to automate that. Like cookie cutter, you could run it again and be like, hey, the project name is actually this. But instead I was just quickly pushing directly to GitHub. But small things
yeah.
like that. Occasionally we do see in the past if we weren't involved in outbounding a repository, perhaps secrets will get committed or keys will get committed. So we have directions in our outbound checklist to say, hey, if you accidentally committed something, here's how you use get filter branch, and here's how you use some of these other tools to help remediate some of these security issues.
Cool. And I suppose the environment that you work in, government employees do tend to be a little bit conservative and a little bit checklist oriented because you really don't want to make those mistakes. I mean, this was years and years and years ago. I did some consulting with Department of Education, maybe. I forget exactly which department, but they were super conservative. It was really kind of funny. So this was, I don't know, 2008, 9, something like that. And there were discussions about posting things to Twitter, and they're like, "Oh, well, it's going to take us a week to get that approved."
Yeah. And this is like a key value proposition of an OSPO, right? Like we're in a public sector now, but even in the private sector, like there are many stakeholders in that last list that Nat breezed over, right? Where it's like the communications office has stakeholders and the legal team has stakeholders and the engineering teams have stakeholders and the business owners have stakeholders. So each of them have their own concerns. And by using a checklist where you're like, okay, every project is going to go through your special part of the checklist, then we can say, yes, we've checked for this. Yes, we've checked for that. So it reduces the amount of overhead so that things don't have to be a special case. Like before checklists existed in previous OSPOs, like every time there was a review, everyone would have to chime in and say, yes, I'm checking all the boxes myself and doing all these checks. Whereas like in a good practice for an OSPO I have seen is like once you have a checklist, then you can also set up like a regular outbound meeting where you can be like, okay, here's a approval queue or a ticket system where you're like, once the checklist exists, you just say, hey, legal stakeholder or whoever stakeholder, here's the latest one. If you check the box, it goes on to the next person. And when all the check boxes are green, it goes out the door. And with the benefits and risks, if you say, look, none of the risk check boxes got checked. Actually, we don't even need to really worry about the security stuff the same way because this is a linter for markdown files. It's not connected to our mainframes, right? So cybersecurity, don't worry, we don't need to do the same type of overhead to do that type of work. And figuring out how to bucket projects into those different lanes is like a key value that OSPO helps to provide and reduces the burden because otherwise everyone else treats every project like it's a critical project or a legal risk or a security risk. And checklists help to normalize that and they operationalize it so that people don't have to waste so many cycles doing everything as one-offs.
Yeah, that's really cool. One of the things I really like about your whole approach to this is that everything's open source and that people can reuse some of your templates and your tiers and customize it. And I'm curious, do you know of anybody else who's sort of taken this and customized it for their OSPOs?
Let's see. I believe the was it the French government, Remy? I'm trying to find the repo. Yeah, but in OSPOs for Good, I wasn't there, but there was a smaller session where I think the French government they were talking about their repository templates and how they forked ours. I think that was the situation. Yeah, so that was super cool to see kind of the international collaboration.
Yeah.
And we have anecdotally heard from various private companies as well that they forked our maturity models and have an internal version, or they forked the repository templates and have an internal version. So even if we can't see it on the outside world, uh, if people have forked the project directly, like we would be able to just check the forks and see. So I think there's a couple forks in there, but uh, we've heard stories from a couple of prominent organizations, which is really exciting. And a quick shout out here. Um, I know in the last OSPO meeting, there were some folks for the new OSPO that said that this was helpful for them. And I was also reading the Linux Foundation's 2025 State of Open Source Program Offices and Source Code Management, I think it's called. And the number one challenge for new OSPOs, like 40 of the respondents was like figuring out where to start and like working from prior art. So, um, based on user group feedback here in the working group and also, the study that's done by the Linux Foundation, and we are very hopeful that these types of tools can be adopted and serve as a model. And that's, why we work in the open is we're hoping that we can reduce that barrier for new folks to get started.
Yeah, that's great. And it's always nice, right? When you see presentations by people like the French government and they're like, "Yeah, we used your thing." Or when you're having conversations with somebody and they tell you that they used, this thing that you created and I don't know about you guys, but I always just feel it just like warms my heart every time somebody says that to me that they've used something that I spent a bunch of time creating because that's why you do it in open source, right? You hope that other people will get value out of it and use it.
Yeah, this is the time to plug the CHAOSS community because we absolutely baked into almost everything we have done. There have been CHAOSS metrics and CHAOSS working groups, and this community has been absolutely crucial for us as we've been building our OSPO from day zero. So, thank you, CHAOSS.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and thank you guys because it's been really nice to have you coming in and talking about the work that you're doing. It's been really interesting. And like you said, people have found it interesting and gotten value out of it. So it's always nice when we can have people come in and talk about what they do.
Yeah, and outside of the maturity models, our repository templates, we know, Dina just shipped tier 1 templates for Department of Health and Human Services. So that's like specific to HHS. We also know that the Department of Education shipped their first open source repositories to GitHub last year, and they used our templates to do that, and they forked them and worked off of them. And the IRS direct file folks that you might have seen, that project went out. They also looked at our repository templates and were that was one of their references. So we are, very, very humbly inspired by other people using the stuff. And, that's why we're really lucky to have Nat and Dina and Sachin and Isaac. They're, repo scaffolder and the maturity models are just the core of so much of the OSPO policy. That's how it actually, the rubber meets the road. And I think that's another thing that makes our OSPO special, is that we're in government, and there's a ton of policy people, and there's a ton of uh, people who are program level, right? We're project level. So being on the ground and saying, okay, well, how do we actually implement this, and mapping from a requirement in legislation or requirement in a regulation to like a command that runs to create a line in a file that complies with that policy. It's like, how do we actually implement the requirements? And I think that makes it really special. And that's why, we have so many engineers on the team, because doing that in-house development and having that resource is a special way that we can provide capacity for the public sector and provide value for the customers and the citizens and the our actual users.
Awesome. That's great. Okay, thank you so much, Natalia and Remy and everyone else from the CMS team for being here. We are just about out of time, so I will just point out on the agenda there are a few reminders. There's a Digital Resilience Forum that's in Madrid on October 29th. That should be interesting if you have folks in Madrid. There's also an OSPOlogy Lyon that Sean Goggins and I are both speaking at. So that's November 5th and 6th. So if you know anybody who happens to be in France and wants to go to that, the link is there as well. And then the FOSS Backstage CFP closes October 27th. So that's an event that's in March in Berlin. But that CFP date is coming right up. So if you're interested in going and submitting a talk, now is when to think about what you want to talk about. All right. Any last thoughts? We've got 2 more minutes. Okay. Thank you all so much for being here, and we'll see you at the next one in a couple of weeks. Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.